We can go ahead and start.
Well, it's nice to see you all here today. My name is John Heyer, and I will be hosting this webinar. But I'm going to start by telling you just a bit about myself. I'm a student at Columbia College earning a teaching degree, as well as an intern for Small Town Allies Against Nicotine Dependency, abbreviated as STAND. I became involved in STAND because of my personal history of substance abuse and would like to make a future less afflicted by addiction, starting with making Columbia College completely smoke and tobacco free. Now, if you have any questions during this webinar, do not be afraid to ask a question in the Q&A section, and please be sure to stay for the raffle near the end. Now, our presenter, Alexandra Winston, has worked in tobacco control for the past 7 years. She has worked as a policy specialist with the Alameda County Tobacco Control Program and as an advocacy manager at the American Lung Association in their Bay Area office. During that time, Alex has worked on more than 25 successful tobacco control programs. Furthermore, Alex has coordinated the Alameda County Tobacco Control Coalition for over 4 years, building its capacity to a list of more than 300 members. She graduated with honors in organizational development and leadership from Eckerd College in her hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. She is currently pursuing a master's in public administration at CSU San Bernardino while working as an aide to Monica Brown, the 2nd District Supervisor of Solano County. She looks forward to continuing to assist the Loop's efforts in coordinating a response to protect the communities from the harms of tobacco abuse, with a focus on the social injustices and health inequalities of disadvantaged populations most affected by this industry. Now, without further ado, here is Alexandra Winston.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I'm happy to be here. This is a little bit of a rough subject area to go over, but it's so important to educate ourselves about these things so that we can create systems change from the top. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull this slide up for you guys. So we are going to be going through some videos and a few different things. As was said, please feel free to throw questions in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them for you. And today we're going to talk about the history of marketing towards priority populations or marginalized populations. In other words, the populations that are most impacted by tobacco use and tobacco-related disease. So John already kind of told you all this stuff about me and what gives me the privilege of being here today. I was very lucky to get into tobacco control about 8 years ago in a very, very busy time in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is why I was able to work on so many successful tobacco control policies throughout the Bay Area. My service area when I was working for American Lung Association was all of the Bay Area counties. It was quite large. So running around from county to county and working on policies throughout the region really, really kind of gave me this trial by fire in all of this stuff. So the history of it is really the why and why we're doing what we do. As you can see on this slide, I put one of these old advertisements. That was for Lucky's. One of the first marketing shticks of the tobacco industry was to get doctors on board and physicians on board. It was their response to the first Surgeon General's report. But all these doctors say it's okay. And don't worry about Lucky Strikes because it's toasted and it makes your throat protected against irritation from coughing, which is kind of just even crazy to think about. So African-American and Black communities, the tobacco industry is absolutely infamous for getting into people's cultures through their marketing. You can see on a lot of these advertisements, you've got hip hop, you've got basketball, there's lots of them with football. You've got like the 70s kind of disco ads going on as well, and like what was in at the time Virginia Slims with their You've Come a Long Way Baby campaign. And we'll get into that a little bit more later in the presentation. So one of the big things that people tend to not know is that there is a relationship between melanin content in people's skin and nicotine. When the tobacco industry was sued and had to release all of their internal documents, including their marketing campaigns, my boss at UCSF, Dr. Valerie Yerger, and her colleague, Dr. Ruth Malone, started poring over these documents and reviewing them. And what they learned is that in the 1950s, the tobacco industry was doing lab testing on animals. And what they learned through that lab testing was that melanin binds to and stores nicotine in the skin. And because of that, it takes a lot longer for it to exit your system. So they learned that, and then they went hell's bells after communities of color. And ever since then, from the 1950s on, you saw menthol tobacco use in Black communities triple every decade. To this day, 45,000 Black lives are lost every year in the United States because of tobacco use. It's a very egregious marketing and lab testing campaign that they ran. This is another one. They called it Project Scum, which was supposed to stand for Subculture Urban Marketing. But what they did in this campaign was to focus on gays in the Castro district of San Francisco and the homeless in the Tenderloin. And a lot of people wonder, well, why would you want to go after folks that don't have any money? Well, when you're marketing a product as stress relief, and people are in inherently stressful situations due to, housing instability, due to social, persecution, if you will, because of sexual orientation, they're like, hey, try this, right? And then once they do, they're addicted and they'll find ways to get it, which is terrible. As many of us know, I'm sure, they did the same thing with our soldiers, right? Our military were affected too. The tobacco industry got into the military and was sending packs of cigarettes in their meals ready to eat in the field when they were at war. And they were selling, that was their, this is for stress relief. Since you're in war here, why don't you get addicted to smoking? So many of them came back as smokers and passed it on to their spouses and so on and so forth. This is a film that I want to share with you called Black Lungs, Black Lives. It's by Lincoln Monday. And Lincoln actually has footage. He was able to find footage of the industry going into Black neighborhoods and handing out free cartons of cigarettes. This was one of the ways in which they got people started. And once they're started, they're customers for life. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play on this and make sure that you can hear it. I've got all the settings on right. And then we'll come back after the video's done.
3 years ago, I accepted an internship with Truth Initiative. At the time, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about tobacco. Yes, it could be deadly, but my generation was rejecting it in much larger numbers. But what I knew was just the beginning. Today, tobacco-related diseases are still the #1 cause of death in the African American community, and that's not a coincidence. During my time with Truth Initiative, I read dozens of research articles and stacks of internal documents directly from tobacco industry files. I learned that the tobacco industry strategically and successfully infiltrated my community. And while it's true that they targeted many groups, the targeting of the Black community has been uniquely damaging.
Critics charge that the tobacco companies view Black smokers as a growing source of income. In fact, they say, Blacks are the target of carefully plotted and highly specific marketing campaigns.
For decades, the tobacco companies have used predatory practices aimed to push their deadly product onto the Black community. Practices that contribute to the approximately 45,000 Black people who will die every year from tobacco-related diseases. This film, Black Lives, Black Lungs, is part of my effort to turn my anger into action. I've set out to give voice to some of the experts and activists who've spent their lives taking on the tobacco industry, because understanding the history of this 50-year-plus campaign is critical for taking back the health of our community.
In high school, I became involved in tobacco control because my uncle passed away from tobacco-related diseases, and I remember him telling me when I was younger that when he first started, it was because the industry told him it would cure his asthma. And if you were to hear that statement today, you would think that's the most ludicrous thing you've ever heard. And I just felt like it was so unfair for an industry to be able to target someone like my uncle and have him die as a result. If he had known the real health effects from the get-go, he would have never picked it up. I lost my uncle to an industry who does not care about him, who does not care about the Black body. And I feel I have a responsibility to speak out against it.
Addiction is about brain chemistry, and it's about access. It's not about personal weakness. It's not about poor Black people just are going to do something anyway. It's about that you give this entity access to the brains of your children, of your people, and they become addicted.
There's nothing inherently Black about menthol cigarettes. They were invented in 1925 by Lloyd Spud Hughes. Spud created his own brand, Spud brand, which were the first widely sold menthol cigarettes in the United States. In 1932, Brown & Williamson Tobacco launched its own menthol brand, Cool. And in 1956, industry behemoth R.J. Reynolds introduced Salem, the first menthol cigarette with a filter tip. R.J. Reynolds marketed Salem as fresher, cool, and refreshing. Of course, all without any scientific proof.
Salem's special paper breathes in fresh air with every puff.
The death rates for African Americans who smoke hover around 49,000 per year. It's no accident that African Americans smoke more menthol cigarettes.
One of the greatest marketing coups that took place in the 20th century is transforming menthol cigarette to the Black cigarette. The African Americanization of menthol cigarettes in the United States starts with finding a specialty product for African Americans following World War II. Many African Americans had moved to the North. There were specialty products being developed for them, certain hair creams, certain foodstuffs, and the tobacco industry, particularly some of them, began to realize we could market a particular brand to this group of people. Brown & Williamson conducted a number of focus groups in the late 50s and early 60s that identified that African Americans were more receptive to TV commercials, more receptive to the messages that are provided there. Brown & Williamson then took 90% of their budget and put it into television advertising because they knew African Americans would disproportionately look at that. They began to use Black images on television and in their ads. In 1953, 5% of African Americans used menthol products compared to 3% for whites. By 1968, that had tripled to 14%. By 1976, it had tripled again to over 42%. Into the 2000s, we're above 80%. That's the African Americanization of menthol cigarettes in the United States. It's the targeted marketing over a half a century toward Black folks.
Let's dig in a little bit deeper and talk about how African Americans are disproportionately burdened by death and disease from tobacco, cigars, and cigarillos. When it comes to understanding it as a public health issue, I didn't know about that, or a social justice issue in particular, until I started working with TRDRP and Truth Initiative. I didn't understand that the industry had been targeting my community.
In the middle of Jim Crow, there's a civil rights battle going on, and the tobacco industry is way past that. They've got Elston Howard, catcher from the New York Yankees, Black man selling cool cigarettes. They have executives in their offices in North Carolina that they're promoting while Black folks can't even get a job or sit at a lunch counter. So they're way ahead of the curve.
In 1971, the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned the advertising of cigarettes on TV and radio.
The tobacco industry was one of the first industries to recognize not all marketing needs to go toward white males. So it was good to see black people in the ads and to see that there were black models and that it wasn't all drugs and gangs. And so it was hard. You know, people saw that and they were very much attracted to that.
For decades, the tobacco industry has infiltrated the black community, infiltrated black institutions. In return, what the black community got was death and disease.
We know the facts. We have the scientific knowledge that tells us that we die in larger numbers. If people stopped smoking, if people resisted using these products, it's a preventable disease. We wouldn't have to die in such large numbers.
Why do some things still happen in society that we know are wrong? It's all tied to money. Why is the tobacco industry able to sell a product that will definitely, undoubtedly kill you? Because there's money tied to it. And money makes things happen.
I found myself very touched and even upset over what I was seeing, because I saw lists of organizations that included organizations that I grew up in, organizations that I was currently a member of, and I had no idea that behind the scenes there were negotiations between the leaders of these organizations and tobacco companies where they were accepting money and sponsorships.
So in the summer of 1984, I was in my preventive medicine residency at Johns Hopkins. I was doing internships around the country. And so one of the organizations I did an internship was with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. While I was there, I was very concerned about the relationship between the CBCF and the tobacco industry. So I started talking to other interns who were there, and then also my supervisors, to sort of see, you know, what can be done. Is it possible to do something from the inside? Because I knew that the effect that it was having on African Americans in general. And so what they suggested was that I write a memo to the executive director. So the memorandum reads, I am very much disturbed by the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's policy of promoting cigarette smoking. I am especially disturbed at the free distribution of cigarettes at CBCF functions. I am requesting that you raise these issues at the CBCF Policy Board in the hope that we will adopt a policy more in line with our interest in the well-being of Black Americans. And that's how it begins.
Unfortunately, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of all African American civil, religious, political, social organizations take money from the tobacco industry. That's just because we ain't got no money. They're buying, they're buying the silence of these people. The Congressional Black Caucus is a multi-million-dollar foundation, and last time I looked, at least half of their members take money from the tobacco industry. Now, not all of them do, and we tried to work, of course, with the ones that don't, like Karen Bass from Los Angeles and Barbara Lee from up here, Alma Adams in North Carolina. But it's a hard sell, and it's still a hard push to get groups to speak up against the tobacco industry.
The tobacco industry has a very interesting and highly complex relationship with African Americans. Yes, the tobacco industry was the first, or among the first industries to give African Americans high-level executive jobs. They fund several Black scholarships, including the Thurgood Marshall Fund. They funded major civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, the National Urban League, the Congress of Racial Equality, and much more. They did give people in the entertainment industry their first leg up. But you can give me everything in the world, but at the end of the day, what is this industry doing? 47,000 African Americans a year die as a result of tobacco-related diseases. That is the leading cause of death in the African American community. There's not enough shiny trinkets in the world that you can give me in exchange for my life. There's not enough shiny trinkets in the world that you could give me in exchange for my brother's life, for my sister's life. It doesn't matter how much money you pump into the community. We are worth so much more. In my experience, people have been shocked to learn that, they fund so much, that their dollars reach so far. But I think that it needs to be known.
I'm sitting at my desk one day in 1998 when the Surgeon General's report comes out, first report on racial and ethnic minorities and smoking, and it just kind of slapped me in the face that African Americans were dying disproportionately of tobacco-related diseases across the board.
I was actually one of the first to start looking at what the industry had written in their own words about their plans to market their products to African American communities and looking at their relationship building with African American organizations and organizations that I was currently a member of, and I had no idea that behind the scenes there were negotiations between the leaders of these organizations and tobacco companies where they were accepting money and sponsorships. Tobacco-related diseases was really, I saw, a main cause for the health disparities that were affecting my community. I couldn't turn my back on this. I just couldn't. And one of my colleagues actually saw me crying at my desk at UC San Francisco because I was just so upset over what I was seeing, and she asked a question, I wonder if others in your community would have this kind of reaction to these documents. We then got funding to do another project where we took the documents to groups of African American smokers and young people, elderly people in the community to find out if they would have a similar reaction. And it was very clear that this was information that they didn't have, that they wanted it, that they wished that they had had prior to them picking up a cigarette.
I work with the group, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Our tagline is Saving Black Lives, and that at bottom it is a social justice question. You might look at it this way: when you have the tobacco industry targeting of African Americans, disproportionately advertising in our communities, giving away free samples, menthol products are less expensive in the African American community. It's a classic definition of a social justice issue where there is a major player taking advantage of a lesser person. Now, there has been some changes. The National NAACP passed a resolution at their July convention saying that chapters could support local and state resolutions to curb or regulate menthol. This is a major breakthrough.
You know, the legislation I'm signing today represents change that's been decades in the making. Today, thanks to the work of Democrats and Republicans, healthcare and consumer advocates, the decades-long effort to protect our children from the harmful effects of tobacco has emerged victorious. Today, change has come.
It's always been an uphill battle. Look at the black folks who fought to set up the Underground Railroad. Look at the black folks who fought Jim Crow. If we're going to fight this, then you're in it for the long haul.
Our communities are under great stress, so we need healthier lifestyles, but we don't need people dumping this poison in our neighborhoods.
If you know someone who smokes who's black, they probably smoke menthol cigarettes. Tell their story.
I think when it comes to just living as an African American, understanding that just because of who we are, our lives are constantly at threat, whether it is racial injustice, police brutality, being denied access to things. All of these issues are layered and connected.
I made a decision at 18 that I was going to fight back, and I am 67. I continue that fight.
Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot. I can't breathe. I think we're all answering the same question. What is the worth of a black body in the United States of America?
Three years ago, I accepted an internship with
So that film says a whole lot about the infiltration of the tobacco industry into Black communities in this country. One of the things that was said in that film was, if you know someone who's Black and they smoke, it's probably menthol. Tell their story. Well, I can share with you that one of those people was my husband. He died 2 years ago. He was only 42 years old. He grew up in Richmond, California, in a predominantly Black neighborhood and was buying cigarettes at age 9 from the corner store there. And yes, he smoked menthol. I think many of us have personal stories related to tobacco in some way, shape, or form. And it's so important to bring those stories forward when we are pushing for change. It humanizes the issue and it makes it real. So now we're going to go through a couple more of the priority populations that are disproportionately impacted by tobacco. One of them, of course, is the Latinx and Hispanic communities. And if you look at these pictures, you can see advertising directed at those communities too. That picture of the pack of menthol cigarettes up in the left-hand corner, that was bought at a store a couple blocks away from where I live here in Vallejo, California. And Vallejo is a city that is 75% people of color. We have a very large Latinx population here. They make up about over 30%, I believe. So that's the place where they're going to install these products. Again, with the Latinx communities, it's all about getting into the culture and what is important. And you can see in these bullet points here, they've even gone as far as to name products as Rio or Dorado. One of the big things they like to do is fund educational programs and scholarships for Latinx youth. Also, they go into their cultural organizations. I can see that down at the bottom bullet point. Their political organizations, similar like they do with African Americans. Their cultural events, and the Hispanic art community. One of the big things they like to get into is rodeos. They also get into lowrider clubs, which is big in the Latinx community here in California. As many of you, I'm sure, know. They're everywhere. They're all over that stuff, and they're getting into the middle of it. And that's how they're getting these populations to get after it. Same with Asian and the Pacific Islander communities. You can see some advertisements here for Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year. They like to sponsor those type of events. Again, they're in their culture. Again, a big push from the industry was towards Asian women because Asian men have a way higher smoking rate than Asian women, and it's been trending that way for quite some time. So they were making advertising towards women saying that you should smoke too, because it will make you feel as powerful as your male counterparts. It will create equality for you. Again, you can see that they have more advertising in Asian American communities, and they like to really promote themselves in their businesses. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the tobacco industry pays store owners quite a bit of money for product placement. If store owners agree to have a specific product visible behind their checkout stand, or they put up a specific, advertisement installation, the industry sends them a check every month for putting their products in people's faces. So they get into the business community very heavily in that way. Women were another target here. You can see some of these ads are pretty horrific. You can see the pregnant mom there smoking a cigarette, again, trying to indicate that that's safe and it's all smooth for expected moms, so it's all good for them. You can see one in the middle here and on the end, the Virginia Slims, but way back to Lucky Strikes, the same type of advertising. Pick up a cigarette instead of a cookie, you'll be thinner, you'll be more attractive. All of that kind of stuff. Virginia Slims came out with cigarettes specifically for women, saying they were long and slender and just like women were supposed to be. So they went after self-esteem and insecurity, basically. You've got all these models out there, that are very tall and very thin. And so they just were like, here, if you smoke these, you will be too. And that was how they went. This, again, you can see up there in the bullet point, social desirability, empowerment, and independence. You know, it's again, that whole narrative of, oh, you'll be equal to men if you smoke cigarettes, which is, you know, crazy to think about. But in that time period, that was the angle, and it worked. I'm going to talk about youth. This particular chart over here is rather disturbing. This is pretty recent data. It's from 2019, and it shows the percentage of youth who are using tobacco products. You can see that cigarettes went way down. Like, we've done all this work, we've done all this effort legislatively and in public relations to kind of stigmatize smoking, if you will, and go after the social norm of smoking and say, this is terrible for you, it's killing people. And all this headway was made, and then e-cigarettes came out. And you can see that 27.5% of high school students are using those. So it just kind of like completely set us way back. Some of the advertising during my time when I was growing up, Joe Camel that was all the jam. They had these little things in the packs of cigarettes called Camel Cash that you could save up a bunch of Camel Cash and get all kinds of free stuff with Joe Camel on it. He eventually was banned when President Obama signed the legislation that you saw in Lincoln Mundy's video. However, I can't walk down the street or drive anywhere in my town without seeing young people wearing backwoods, jogging suits, hoodies, like you see in these pictures here. Backwoods is a very popular cigar brand that people mostly use to smoke marijuana with. How they're getting around the ban on giving out basically clothing and, you know, swag, if you will, which was banned in the same piece of legislation that President Obama signed, I have no idea, but they are. My son goes to Vallejo High School. I can't go to his high school without at least seeing 2 kids wearing backwoods attire of some kind. And then, of course, in that other quarter, you can see all those candy flavored e-juices that look like candies we're all familiar with, like Sour Patch Kids and cotton candy, and they have all kinds of stuff. Tricks. They even have one called unicorn poop. It's insane. But clearly it's not being advertised towards adults, you know, that it's towards youth. So they're getting their new product base and to kind of like further that along, I'm going to play this clip from the congressional hearings that they had regarding Juul, which was one of the leading electronic cigarette makers. Their headquarters were in San Francisco, and they took a lot of notes out of the tobacco industry's playbook and started infiltrating into schools. And this hearing kind of outlines how they did it. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you so you can get an idea of kind of like how we're hitting that start over button again, right? You saw in Lincoln's film them going in and with the vans and handing out all the free cigarettes. Like, they're finding different ways to get into and create new customers, right? So this kind of outlines what was going on with that. And I'm going to play it for you so you have an idea of where the new marketing has gone and is going.
Today, because of devices like Juul and the accompanying kid-friendly flavors, 4 million children nationwide are vaping.
Juul sent a representative to talk to our kids about its product under the guise of education.
Did the presenter ever say that Juul was safe?
Yes.
Did the presenter call Juul totally safe more than once?
Yes.
What impact did those totally safe comments have on your classmates?
For my classmates who were already vaping, it was a sigh of relief because now they were able to vape without any concern.
It is not a political issue, but a moral one. And if we don't take action now, we face an entire generation of kids addicted to nicotine who are human guinea pigs for the Juul experiment.
So in advance of this hearing, we sent Juul a letter asking you to identify every celebrity, influencer, and marketing agency that was engaged by Juul. And Mr. Muncie's response pointed to only 4 influencers and state that you, quote, do not have a traditional celebrity or influencer program. Exhibit 4 is a March 2nd, 2015 contract with Grit Creative Group. The contract required Grit to, quote, curate and identify 280 influencers to seed Juul product over the course of 3 months. Is this correct?
I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that document.
It's information you provided us. So do you still maintain that you didn't have an influencer program?
Look, it sounds like we're getting into territory I'm not completely familiar with, so
We do need to be clear about one thing. No one wants kids to use tobacco. No one wants kids vaping. And no one wants vaping companies to target children with advertisements.
Did Juul honestly sponsor a summer camp for 3rd graders?
Whatever grants were made focused on youth prevention effort.
Ms. Gould, was Juul aware that Big Tobacco had funded similar life skills programs beginning in the late 1990s?
It was in May of 2018 we received information from a public health expert informing us on what tobacco companies had done previously, and we stopped those activities.
So Exhibit 25, though, is an email from Julie Henderson a month before this life skills proposal about how Big Tobacco promoted life skills training in the 1990s as a PR strategy to deflect attention from its efforts to targeting kids.
We have never marketed to kids.
You settled a lawsuit with Philip Morris where they alleged that you copied Marlboro's trade dress. Is that correct?
That was that was what they said.
Did you rush any products onto the market before the August 8th grandfather date in order to beat that effective date?
We did. I think that's a very fair way to put it.
21 pod flavors and 2 to 3 additional nicotine strengths and 27 bottled juice flavors and 3 nicotine strengths. That's a major push.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Is it your belief that all of this is grandfathered from the FDA regulation? That is why you rushed these products?
So every product that's on market right now was in no way rushed.
You took a Stanford researcher's work without their permission and changed it to suit your needs. Mr. Moniz, isn't it true that Stanford issued Juul a cease and desist letter demanding that you stop using the misappropriated content?
I'm sorry, but I'm not aware of anything along those lines.
Thousands of retailers have been caught selling your products to children. Your ballot measure also seeks to insulate those peddlers from liability. How does making it harder to hold retailers accountable for selling your product to children help keep your products out of children's hands?
Congressman, I don't know the details of that. The product we developed holds the promise to do what no previous technology has done: help adult smokers stop smoking combustible cigarettes.
Our product is intended to help smokers stop smoking combustible cigarettes.
So what happened was when they came, it was in front of initially the tribal council. And at that meeting, that's when they made those claims of less harm and smoking cessation. And I'll reiterate that that's not allowed. They cannot claim smoking cessation or less harm. And that's when they handed out free product to our decision makers, free product. And we have council members now who are regular users of Juul.
You appear to be marketing yourself as a smoking cessation device. FDA-approved smoking cessation products include instructions. Does your product come with these instructions?
It does not, and we would never market it as a cessation product.
After 30 lines starting with quit,
the ad says switch. Mr. Monsees, I imagine that you chose your words very carefully in these ads. Yes or no, did your lawyers tell you that this ad was not claiming to be a therapeutic cessation device?
We do not claim for Juul to be a cessation product.
If you made the direct statement to the U.S. government that your products were healthier than cigarettes, you would expect to be regulated that day, wouldn't you?
I can't state more emphatically. Juul is specifically and on purpose not a cessation product.
Okay, so as you can see, the e-cigarette industry has also been up to many of the same things that the tobacco industry was. If you watch closely, Juul was sponsoring summer camp for kids as young as 8. They were going into elementary schools. You heard the woman speak about them going before tribal council. Again, the things that they do, it is unbelievable and difficult to describe. I just want to also give a hat tip. Congressman Elijah Cummings was in that video clip, just hearing his voice again, you know, in honor of Black History Month. He was an institution in and of himself. And he was also taking a stand against youth taking up of smoking e-cigarettes. Another thing I want to bring up that's really relevant right now is COVID-19. I mean, there's been some misinformation that's come out from the industry that says things like smoking will help protect you from the virus, that people who vape are less likely to get the virus. And these things have already been debunked and they're not true. So they obviously cause potential damage to the vapors and smokers themselves because their lungs are already damaged and they're preoccupied running damage control and not able to fight off this respiratory virus as easily as people who have a more robust immune system that aren't putting all kinds of chemicals in their bodies. There's about 7,000 different chemicals in a cigarette, not just tobacco. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Also in the e-juices, there's multiple different kinds of chemical. Also metals, like nickel is in there. Formaldehyde has been found in some of them. Pretty bad stuff, pretty toxic stuff. So the other thing I think that people don't think about is that the vapors themselves are constantly touching surfaces, then touching a vape device and putting it in their mouth over and over and over again. So the potential for them to have virus or any other type of bacteria really on their hands and be making that continuous motion or putting it in their pocket and pulling it out of their pocket and whatever is a lot more increased. Potential damage to others. I'm sure many people in this room have seen a vape cloud. They're huge. And in every little particle that is in that cloud, there is infection potentially, if you have the infection, blowing out all over everyone and everything and falling onto all of the surfaces around you. It's almost like if you can visibly see somebody breathing when it's cold outside. If they take like a big like whoosh, you can see all the vapor that's coming out of their lungs, right? Well, potentially there's microscopic particles of virus and all of that. So it's clearly dangerous for others as well. I guess these 2 slides did not copy over, right? But that is one of the potential damages to others, of course. There's also secondhand vaping inhalation from other people. And again, anybody who's at higher risk of the virus puts everybody else at a higher risk of the virus. So we are in the middle of a Black Lives Matter movement. It is Black History Month, as you heard in a lot of this presentation. 45,000 and up African Americans die from smoking related diseases in this country every year. It is the leading cause of death. It surpasses all other causes of death. That includes AIDS, homicide, diabetes, accidents. You could combine all of those and you still wouldn't have the same number of folks that die from tobacco-related disease. If current smoking rates persist, 1.6 million Black Americans alive today under the age of 18 will become regular smokers, and about 500,000, that's 500,000, will prematurely die from tobacco-related disease. As you also heard in the film, 88.5% at last check, African-American smokers ages 12 and older use menthol cigarettes. This is a Black Lives Matter issue. It is one of the biggest issues. I think that one of the reasons it's important to know all of this is because it's an emergency. It's absolutely an emergency. It's a public health emergency. If you look at that number, 500,000, we just lost that many people in this pandemic, and it's like the biggest thing that ever happened. This needs to be the biggest thing that ever happened too. I think often when we are talking to decision makers and policy makers, they're constantly running damage control and they're putting out fires. They're doing symptomatic problem solving. This is fundamental problem solving. It doesn't look like an emergency because it takes a pretty long time to kill people. However, it kills more people than anything else. And so I think that it's important to state that when you are trying to create policies and change, that you do have to be able to make it relevant and you have to make it a now issue. And this is a now and been now issue that has been going on for quite some time. The numbers are absolutely staggering and will knock people down. My dear friend and colleague, Carol Magruder, who was also in that film and who I'm hoping to have some time to play some of her testimony for you, often says that as all these things are happening with police brutality, with protesting, with violence in neighborhoods, the war on drugs, you know, all of these things going on the whole time, the civil rights movement, as you saw, and Jim Crow, right, as Dr. Phil also said, the tobacco industry is just there beating their drum in the background the entire time. And it's amazing how they've been able to just kind of play around behind the scenes without the spotlight getting on them. But that is changing a little bit. So these are all very recent headlines in the news. There are starting to get the spotlight put on the industry for what they have been doing all this time. This first headline is totally spot on, where it says the tobacco industry has been destroying Black lives for centuries. It's time it faced a reckoning. You can see an article here about protecting Black lives from the tobacco industry that was in the SACB. On the other side of this, you can also see young people coming out as bisexual, twice as likely to start smoking. Again, they're going after the LGBTQIA community. You can see another article there on that. You can also see Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. They're still at it. And the targeting of U.S. immigrants, and there's a whole presentation could be done on the targeting of United States immigrants from the supply chain up. The tobacco companies take a lot of examples from the coal industry, from the oil industry, from all of that. They have their workers working in toxic conditions around dangerous substances all the time. They have their own stores and property where they people need something from the store. Oh, they go to the store, they don't have enough money to pay for it. Oh, don't worry, the tobacco industry will give you credit. And then they wind up owing the industry that they work for all of this money because they can't afford to live. And it's kind of like this vicious cycle of stuff that goes on. But that's one of the ways. Oh, and rest assured, many of them smoke too, of course. So lastly, I'm gonna set up these videos a little bit for you. The first one, I'm gonna ask everybody to probably crank up their volume, probably as high as it can go, and because the video itself is very low volume. A colleague of mine at Alameda County caught this in the car. We had been trying to catch a recording of this ad because it was blasting throughout the Bay Area on all R&B and hip hop stations. And what was going on at this time was that San Francisco, Oakland, the city of San Leandro, and Contra Costa County were all moving forward with flavored tobacco restriction policies that were going to ban the sale of menthol. So the industry spent a whole lot of money fighting against that. And this is a radio ad that they were playing, and I want you to listen to it carefully because it indicates a lot of things that make flavor restrictions and menthol restrictions sound really scary. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. Like I said, get ready, turn your volume way up because this is pretty low.
City councils may soon vote to ban the sale of menthol cigarettes.
Ooh, did it stop playing? It stopped playing. Hold on. Let's rewind and start again. It's very short.
Cisco City councils may soon vote to ban the sale of menthol cigarettes. Smoking is bad for your health, and we do not want our kids to smoke. But banning menthols will expand the profitable underground market and the sale of illegal cigarettes in the Bay Area. Let's not set a trap for our kids. There are enough problems with crime in our communities. Police attempting to enforce the tobacco ban will not stop people or our kids from smoking and may lead to harassment and arrest. Although our leaders are well-intentioned, similar bans have failed to produce public health benefits in other cities. Public health education to reduce smoking has been far more effective than banning any tobacco product. We strongly urge you to call the members of your city council today and voice your concerns about the unintended consequences of enforcing a menthol cigarette ban in the Bay Area. All residents of the Bay Area, we strongly urge you to call the members of your city council today and voice your concerns about the unintended consequences of enforcing a menthol cigarette ban in the Bay Area. This message is brought to you by Law Enforcement Action Partnership. My name is...
So I hope you were able to hear that, but what that ad was basically saying was, if you ban menthol cigarettes, there's going to be all these unintended consequences that happen in our communities. We already have enough problems with police harassment and brutality and crime in our neighborhoods. Your kids could get arrested. And at the end, it says, this ad is sponsored by Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is basically just a PAC that the tobacco industry put together to make it sound like that ad was sponsored by law enforcement and that cops were basically telling people, well, this is what's going to happen. Mind you, it's a ban on the sale, not on the possession of these products. But this is the angle and the tactics that they use to scare people. So I'm also going to play a little bit of testimony from the Oakland City Council meeting. Unfortunately, we don't have time to listen to the whole thing, but I am going to skip over to Carol Magruder's testimony because I feel like it wraps everything into one, and it's very powerful testimony. To set this video up, I will tell you that when we were working on this policy, Reverend Al Sharpton was going into the churches in East and West Oakland in the Black community on behalf of the tobacco industry. He has paid a great deal of money for them. He's a huge trusted community servant. And he was going into the churches and he was sharing the same message that this radio ad said, that this is going to cause, this is a Black tax. This policy is only targeting Black communities, and it's going to cause us more problems with law enforcement. And basically that it's oppression, Not that it was public health, but that it was oppression. And also former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, him and his lobbying firm were hired by the tobacco industry to lobby against this policy. The tobacco industry also gave retailers throughout the city of Oakland thousands and thousands of dollars, to which they handed out to their customers to have them show up at City Hall and picket in front of City Hall. It was a big battle. I'm just going to put it that way. And one of the co-sponsors of this policy is City Council member Larry Reed in the city of Oakland. He is also an institution in that city himself. He represents East Oakland, a predominantly Black part of the city. He is a menthol smoker. He has diabetes and he has had 2 heart attacks. By the time this policy moved forward, he was just recovering from his 2nd heart attack. And he had quit at that time for about a couple of months, I think. Hopefully he still is, I'm not entirely sure. However, he didn't wish it on anyone else. And he knew it was a problem. He knew it was killing him, and he also knew it was killing other members of his community. And the funny thing is that Larry bought his cigarettes at Walgreens, and we had a tobacco-free pharmacies piece in this policy that he made us take out. He said he would not sponsor the bill if we continued to have that in there, and he was still smoking at the time that this law started. So interesting little tidbits here. So when Carol is speaking, there's a couple moments in this film where you may not be able to tell what's happening. I'm going to tell you that the people who were picketing, that are holding up all these signs about it being a Black tax and freedom of choice and all of this, they're sitting up in the mezzanine level in Oakland City Council chambers, and she looks up to them and she addresses them at one point in the video. There's also another point in the video where she's talking about Black community leaders taking money from the tobacco industry, and someone that's sitting in the chambers says, "Who are they?" And then she starts naming them, but you can't hear the person answer that question. So I just kind of wanted to fill in the blanks there. So I'm going to try and find the spot in this video where she starts. That's my boss, Dr. Yerger there. All right, here's Carol. We have enough time for this, and then we'll do the Q&A and wrap everything up.
My name is Carol Magruder, and I am the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. We were formed in 2008, and we are composed of a cadre of dedicated community activists, academicians, and researchers with over a combined 200 years of experience in tobacco control. And though we are based here in California, we have had a national scope and reach. We have partnered with community stakeholders, elected officials, and public health agencies to inform the national direction of tobacco control policy, practices, and priorities, especially as they affect the lives of Black Americans, African immigrant populations, and ultimately all smokers. We work at the intersection of tobacco control and prevention and social injustice. And I want to say that I don't know what people, when they look at us, what they think, where they think, we come from. We hear that we are the do-gooders, that we are well-intentioned, but we don't know what we're talking about. I grew up in Baby Hunters Point. I lived through the crack epidemic in my community. I have visited my family in jail. I have lost loved ones to drug abuse and substance abuse. I was the co-chair of the Pan-African Student Union at San Francisco State University in the 70s. Dr. Philip Gardner is a former Black Panther. Dr. Valerie Yerger's father was an advisor to the Black Panthers in Oakland when they were formed. So we know a little bit about our community. We're not just, this isn't just some namby-pamby thing that we're pulling out of the air. This is from research and hard work and what we have seen and experienced in our own lives and professionally. We have been at the forefront in elevating the regulation of mentholated and flavored tobacco products on the National Tobacco Control Agenda even before President Obama signed the 2009 Tobacco Control Act. This act prohibited all flavored cigarettes except menthol. And that's what African American people need to know was at the beginning, we were the public policy, the negotiation chip, that other people were protected and our children were not. Our children were relegated to the back of the public health bus. and as well all of the cheap cigars and the products that inundate our communities. All you need to do is go and look on the ground in our communities, and you can see what our young boys and men are smoking. This initial protected status was the public policy negotiation. So we applaud Oakland and we applaud the other Bay Area cities as you take this bold move to protect our youth and their families from the vestiges of decades of predatory tobacco activity. There's a new documentary that was released this week. The film is funded by the Truth Initiative out of DC. It's a young Black filmmaker whose name is Lincoln Monday, and the film is called Black Lungs, Black Lives, and we're going to bring that film, that documentary, here to Oakland very soon. In this film, he has the actual footage of the vans going through the Black community giving out free cigarettes. What Dr. Valerie Yerger described in her research paper, Racialized Geography, he actually has footage of it. One of the little girls who got those Newport cigarettes was a 9-year-old little girl in Boston. Her name was Marie Evans. She was addicted at 13, dead at 54. And we are still living with the vestiges of that pernicious predatory activity. These vans were told explicitly to stay out of white neighborhoods. And much like the movie The Godfather, in the scene where they were deciding they were going to bring drugs into the communities, and they said, oh, we will leave that for the coloreds because they have no soul. And that is what the tobacco industry has been doing to us for the last 30 years. So I want to say that, and so we are succeeding. We are interrupting the supply. We are getting into their profit margin. And the tobacco industry, they know that addiction is about access to populations and brain chemistry. There's no race of people who's more weak, who's more stupid than the others. It's about access to populations and brain chemistry. And we're seeing that cold hard fact with the opioid and the heroin addiction that is going across middle America. And now it's a public health policy. Now we have compassion for people who are addicted to a substance. So we want to tell the tobacco industry, because the money's flowing. They're hiring people, African American people, to carry their water. And we want to tell any Black leader, any Black clergy, any Black consultant, shame, shame, shame on you. Shame on you. They invoked the name of Eric Gardner, the brother who was killed in New York because he was selling single cigarettes. His death had nothing to do with what he was doing. Do people remember Amadou Diallo, the African immigrant from Guinea? He was shot 44 times, including in the soles of his feet when he fell backwards as he stood on his stoop in New York. I spoke to his mother. I interviewed his mother at the time. Shame on them for linking these deaths to the problems of police brutality and misconduct that we must deal with. It has nothing. We're not going to let 45,000 Black people die every year because we don't want to deal with the police brutality and misconduct that is killing our Black men. So we talk about Philando Castile. We talk about Sandra Bland. We talk about our own beloved Oscar Grant, because they matter, their lives matter, but so do the 45,000 nameless Black people who go to their grave feeling guilty about their choice. They feel guilty about their choice because they don't know that their choice is fueled by manipulation and predatory activity of the industry. But it's a new day, and I speak to Black people all over this country. The NAACP has passed a national resolution supporting what we're doing. Delta Sigma Theta sorority has passed a national resolution, but the average African American on the street corner understands what we're doing. And when we talk about the leaders who come out and who are providing cover for the tobacco industry, they're not very happy. And there are people who are going to lose credibility in their community for carrying the water for the tobacco industry. Reverend Al Sharpton, former Congressman Kendrick Meek, NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement. Those are some of the organizations and people who are doing it. Our brother here at BB Memorial was part of that, the pastor. So we want to say it's a new day. We want our community to tell them to get out. Get out. That's the message that we want to bring to the tobacco industry. And we support you in your choice, but our children don't have a choice. So whatever I do, as Dr. Valerie Yerger said, animals protect their young, their children. So let's protect our children. Let's get the smokers involved. You are free to do whatever you like. You just can't buy it in Oakland and San Francisco anymore. Thank you.
Oh, that's Councilmember Larry Reed, who I was just talking to you about as I was setting up this video. And of course, I always call her Honorary Dr. Carol Magruder. And very, very, very powerful testimony at Oakland City Council. This ordinance did pass. It passed the first time around, as you can see, in 2017. It did have an exemption at that time to allow tobacco only 21 and up stores to still carry flavor and menthol products. What we saw happen with that is many stores who were selling other items and were not tobacco only stores changed their business model and became tobacco only stores. Just this last year, we revisited this ordinance. I called in and spoke on behalf of the ordinance too. And mind you, in the time that this ordinance passed and the time that it was amended to do an all-out ban on flavored and menthol tobacco, my husband had passed away in between that time. And I spoke about that in my testimony, and I said, you know, we were too late for him. When he was a young man growing up, if these products would have been available in his neighborhood, he wouldn't be dead at 42. So very real stuff. Carol did a very nice job, I think, in this too, kind of emphasizing the fact that we all have a stake in this game in one way or another. People are affected by that. When she says that line, 45,000 nameless Black lives go to their grave every year feeling guilty about their choice. I was in chambers when I was tears everywhere, but she was right. And who she was talking to is the people, like I said, up in that mezzanine level who were talking about and holding those signs that said freedom of choice, which is one of the big plugs of the industry. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation. I know I threw a lot of information at you. I tried to bring forth the leading voices in this arena that I am very privileged to be able to work alongside, for them to share their messages with you. And I have an evaluation from UCSF Salute. I'm going to post it in the chat as soon as we're done, but I want to leave it open for Q&A, and I don't know, take it away, John.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you again for presenting tobacco marketing to marginalized populations. This, in many ways, was monumental. I didn't quite know some of the points you're about to discuss until, well, we saw its ugly face. But we have now entered the Q&A session using the Q&A option below with the 4 comments in there already. Or if you raise your hand so we can unmute your microphone, you can ask questions directly to Ms. Winston. The first question I would like to ask, and I think this was from another panelist, but this is an especially pressing point. You mentioned that melanin has a special retaining quality to nicotine. This feels massive. I'm not from a Black background. I'm about as pale as it gets, but I feel as if this kind of feature is massive. Could you speak more about this property of nicotine and melanin?
A little bit. I can also post in the chat a link to the research paper by Dr. Yerger and Dr. Malone. But basically what was going on is when they were doing laboratory testing, they were doing it on animals that have melanin in their skin and not melanin in their skin. So think about pigs that have black spots, right? They have the pale pink skin, and then they have the skin that has the melanin content in it, which makes the black spots on the pig. So that's what they were doing. And they were finding that the skin that had melanin in it, the nicotine was binding to the melanin in the dark spots on the animals and not on the light ones. And that's how they found that out. I don't know if that helps, but like I said, I can also, and I'm sharing my slide deck, and you all are welcome to send it out to whomever is interested. And I believe the link to the paper is on that too.
Thank you so much. Now, another question comes from Laureen Campana. What was the age range for youth when, I believe in reference to one of the studies you found about how explicitly the Juul targets youth? Like what is the age range? How are we looking at it?
Well, what they were talking about is that Juul is going into mostly middle school and high schools doing those presentations. But they were sponsoring summer camps for kids as young as 8.
Wow.
I think we're doing the poll.
Yes.
Okay.
I just added the poll so people can go ahead and fill it out while you're answering the questions, because I didn't want anyone to kind of drop out if they had anything else to do. But please go ahead and continue to answer the questions, and please stay to the end if you can so that we can do the raffle.
Thanks, Delana.
Thank you for doing that too. Now we have a question from Blanca. I have a 15-year-old daughter. Schools are reopening and she's already attending in-person classes. It scares me to know that this pandemic has changed so much. All these stresses are carrying. All of the stress that we are carrying may affect the way we have taught our children about tobacco use. What will be a better way of guiding my daughter to see the downsides of nicotine abuse? I can't stop her if she makes mistakes, but I can help her in kind of pushing her forward.
It's a good question. And I think that there's a couple of different things I would say about that. One thing is that peer-to-peer education is so important when it comes to young people. So many young people are willing to listen to their peers, but they're not willing to listen to their parents or to other authority figures. So I would certainly check to see if 2B is working in your school district, which is the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program, which would be through your county's Office of Education, and see kind of what youth they have involved with their program, or if there's any kind of basically what they're up to in your school district, and see if you can get your child involved. And the other thing I would do is to sit down and watch some of this stuff. Have a conversation. Like I said, watch the Juul congressional hearing and say, look at what they're doing. I mean, they're skeevy, right? I mean, there's not really any other way to put it. They're sneaky and they're skeevy. I mean,
absolutely
convicted racketeers. So
I don't mean to.
I think people don't like feeling like prey and that there are predators after them. It makes them get defensive and it makes them get angry. And sometimes that's the best way to educate and teach people to stay away from stuff that's bad for them.
Thank you so much for answering that. I apologize for butting in on that one, but I think another pressing feature too was just how one of the lawyers during the Senate hearing on Juul was composing himself. It was terrifying in a way. Now from Jose Montoya, do you have any information on Altera, Juul Labs contracting with Locust ST to create a shadow grassroots social media campaign to confront tobacco control efforts? So are you aware of this current development?
I don't think I am of that particular one. I am aware of some of the really big vaping lobbyist groups, like CASA is a big one. There's some other ones. I can't even think of what their names are off the top of my head. Is it Still Blowing Smoke? Still Blowing Smoke is one of them. There's a few. I don't think I'm familiar with that particular one, but I'm completely not surprised. No surprises there.
You just can't at this point. Like it's, we know how low they stoop. Again, thank you so much. Would we like to enter the raffle section?
Yeah, let's do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Everyone can see that? Yes? Okay, so the first one, we're gonna do the 2 Subway, $25 Subway gift cards, and then we will do the $50 Kohl's, 2 $50 Kohl's. So let's spin. Let's see. Takes a long time to stop. Is it gonna? Oh, okay, Alexis. Yay, congratulations, Alexis. I have everyone's email, obviously, from registering, so I will send you an email with the best, to request the best mailing address where you'd like the gift card sent to you. So congratulations on that $25 Subway gift card. I'm gonna spin again for the next Subway gift card. This thing takes a long time to stop. Okay, Dolores, congratulations to you for also winning. So we're going to remove. And now to the $50 Kohl's gift card. Krista, congratulations. And last one, fingers crossed. Let's see who gets the last $50 Kohl's gift card. Gabriel. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you guys again for attending. I will go ahead and send emails out to the winners. As a reminder, there is a link to Alex's post presentation evaluation. So I'm not sure if you want to put it in the chat again, Alex, just so it's at the bottom. She also linked the article to the link to nicotine and melanin. So you guys can read more on that if you are requesting more information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any more questions? I can hang out for a few more minutes and kind of see. Happy to answer some more.
So again, I'd like to thank you so much for doing this. But another question that I just have is you mentioned how these tobacco companies would extend credits, would extend a line of credit to usually working class communities, regardless of race. And this would then also work as a cover for harmful industrial practices to be relegated because whatever, they're smokers anyway. Well, could you maybe talk about this a little bit more, like how exactly it operated? Because that's how I lost my grandfather.
Yeah, it has to do with the farm workers. And again, it's really similar to what the coal industry did actually in West Virginia. John, you said your name was, so they did the same thing in the coal towns in West Virginia, where the coal companies owned the general store. They underpaid their workers and they didn't have enough money to feed their families. So what they did is like, oh, well, you can have company credit to buy your groceries. And so they're working and then they're having to hand their paycheck right back to the same company over. It's like a cycle that continues and continues and continues. And the tobacco industry does the same thing with their farm workers. That was very common practice. So it's right, basically you're handing your paycheck right back to the company that you're working for in its entirety because you've racked up all this credit. It'd be like if you worked at Safeway and Safeway gave you credit for your groceries, but they didn't pay you enough money to live on. So you're like, okay, well, here's my whole paycheck because I have to feed my family, right? And like they just keep taking their own money back over and over and over again.
It is still remarkably too common. And, then adding in the mix nicotine addiction, adding in the mix even less accountability for these firms that really do need to update their health and safety is heartbreaking. And I really appreciate you shining a light on that.
Things have gotten better. We should say a little hat tip to Cesar Chavez too, who Cesar Chavez Day is coming up next month. And he, of course, was one of the founding members of United Farm Workers of America, who unionized farm workers, who finally got them entered into contracts and negotiating so that they had more rights and they weren't being exposed to all these, as many, I should say, harmful chemicals and pesticides and kind of living in these conditions. But certainly another civil rights leader in his own right, who's got his celebration coming up in the next month.
I will keep that noted. And from the chat, member Jerry Sawicki, I apologize if I mispronounced. He's actually doing a lecture for today for his race and ethnicity class on these topics. And
oh, good. Spread the word. Absolutely. I think the more we get this information out to the community, the better. I've given this presentation. I played the full testimony of that Oakland City Council hearing during trainings. And, I've had people just like come up to me that are just in tears. They cannot believe it. And of course, like I said, we all have this personal impact, right? They have family members and people who passed away. And they're like, you're right. They did used to come into the neighborhoods and give out free Newports. Like, we didn't even think anything about it. It was like, yay, they're here. Like the free stuff is here, right? It's such an innocent way of thinking. It's kind of like when the ice cream truck comes to the neighborhood, right? It's free stuff. Really sad stuff, but very true. I had a gentleman actually, and I think this is another important thing to talk about, is that I had a gentleman in a smoke-free housing presentation stand up. He was elderly. And he said, oh, I quit smoking a long time ago. I don't understand what everyone else's problem is. Well, a long time ago, there was just tobacco and cigarettes. And today, there are 7,000 other things in cigarettes that are meant to be in them, chemicals, to keep you addicted, not just nicotine. And I explained that to him. And I said, so for our modern day smokers, it may be a little bit harder for them. And he goes, well, I didn't know that. And then he sat down. But, you know, it's important to know this stuff. I say that, you know, when people, like I said earlier, Kit, when things get under their skin and it gets them riled up and they get angry at this industry, creating an environment by design to kill their community members, that's what creates change. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're working on it. I would say that the Bay Area, pretty much the region of the whole East Bay area, with the exception of some places, it's a pretty far blanket of jurisdictions that have done flavor restriction policies, including menthol. So people are having to drive further and further away to get it. Of course, SB 793, a referendum was done by the industry on the state level for that. I have like 2 minutes where I'm just going to do a quick little plug on that so people know about it who are still here. SB 793 was going to be a menthol and flavor tobacco ban that would cover the entire state. It went through the assembly and the House at the state level. The governor did sign it. The tobacco industry lobbied extremely hard to issue a referendum on it and was successful. They were paying people $8 a signature during a pandemic to collect signatures. They needed over 637,000 signatures or something like that. I think they wound up turning in over 800,000 just to be sure. They were able to put it back. It is going on the ballot. So it will be going to the people for a vote as to whether or not this particular piece of legislation will be upheld, and those products will no longer be able to be sold in our state. So keep your eyes peeled about that, know about it, so that you can support upholding the initiative and hopefully getting these products out of our communities. And with that, we are at 1:29.
And thank you so much, Alex, for coming in and blessing us with all of this knowledge. I learned something definitely, so I'm sure the attendees did as well.
Great, happy to be here with you all. Thanks for having me and have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.